So again, Keith Brown from Melikian Center and the Critical Languages Institute, welcoming you to this session as part of CLI's co-curricular programming during the summer of 2020. Being online gives us the opportunity to bring in voices that we wouldn't necessarily hear from. We know that many of you are in different time zones, and so we appreciate your adding to the labor of your language learning this morning or this afternoon or early this morning, joining us for this session as well. So as usual, we're going to go about an hour. We'll probably stick around longer if there's interest. Just to introduce our speaker, Eric Rodriguez is a returned Peace Corps volunteer who was in Tetovo until COVID-19 forced the Peace Corps to bring home pretty much, I think, all their volunteers around the world. He was there assisting with professional development and grant writing at the University of Tetovo, which is one of the state-funded universities in Macedonia, which operates in Albanian primarily. And Tetovo, as those of you who know the region, is an Albanian majority part of North Macedonia. Eric came to this after finishing his MPA at ASU, where he studied between 2016 and 2018, and that was after an undergraduate degree a few years before that at NAU. So a lot of Arizona ties. The things I particularly wanted to flag in Eric's experience, first, like other Peace Corps volunteers, he went through language and cultural training before taking up his post in Tetovo. And for those of you who are aspirational, he got to intermediate mid in the course of that 11 weeks of work. Hillary's given you the thumbs up there. And sustained that, and obviously is a vital part of his relationship building in Tetovo with his counterparts. I know that from talking to Eric, he was, there's a couple of folks here who saw him while he was in Tetovo. So Steve Bertolden has also joined us, as well as Dan Fellner from ASU. I know he was really feeling like he was just beginning to make headway as in the work he was doing when he was forced to repatriate. And he has a message that he posted on LinkedIn where he describes the evacuation experience as heartbreaking. And what he writes, the endeavors and relationships I'd worked so hard to build in my first year were just starting to bear fruit. I built a great social network and I just started to feel like I was part of the community. No words can express what it's like to build a life and suddenly have it ripped away from you. I still miss my life, my work, my friends, and my adopted family. I met and worked with some wonderful people, many of whom will be lifelong friends. I'm a better and hopefully smarter man for the experience, and I got so much more out of my Peace Corps experience than I could ever have given in 10 lifetimes. And that message, I know, prompted various expressions of solidarity and fellow feeling as well. But just to give you a background for what Eric's going to talk about, which is that time in Tetovo, what he took into it and what he takes out of it. So Eric, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and hello to Stephen and to Dan. It's I don't know what a world this is. That I don't know, after our encounters, that here we are meeting again in the virtual world. So it's pretty amazing. Yeah, so my Peace Corps experience, I think I'll give you sort of a brief background as to why I opted for Peace Corps. I worked probably in the corporate sector for almost 18 years. And around 2013, I decided that I wanted to make a career shift. I wanted to go into public service of some sort, and I wasn't quite sure how to do it. My first step was to go back to ASU to get my MPA, which was described by the School of Public Affairs as an MBA with a conscience. And so for me, that basically jumped out. I was sold when it was described to me in that manner. So I went back, I enrolled, I pursued my my MPA while I was still working. I was actually working as a manager in downtown Phoenix. And in 2016, I earned my MPA. And at that point, I was ready to try and make the shift from the corporate world into public service. And I knew I just couldn't go start banging on the doors of government organizations and NGOs saying I have a degree, hire me. So I really needed some type of practical experience to sort of to bridge those sort of two sectors. Additionally, I'd always wanted to live abroad and sort of challenge myself, put myself in a foreign environment. So in terms of what my goals were, Peace Corps really just ticked off all the prerequisites. So I applied. Peace Corps wasn't, or Peace Corps was, from my understanding at the time, very, very competitive. And so I kind of applied thinking, well, they're not going to really take me anyway, but I might as well apply. And it was a pretty rigorous even application process. You go through several applications, you have an interview, followed by a series of medical screenings, and these are individual to each country. So I'd say for anybody who's interested in Peace Corps, just keep in mind that there are going to be sort of some very sort of country-specific prerequisites you have to fulfill that will be different from country to country. So I was offered the position that would have been now in February of 2018, I believe. Gosh, my memory's already going, but I accepted it. And in September of that year, I was on a plane to North Macedonia. I really did not know that much about it. I kind of knew where it was, but I'd never been to the Balkans before, so I wasn't quite sure what to expect. And we got there, and I was actually placed in Tetovo. At that time, I did not know that that was actually going to be my actual work site. But there are two universities there, University of Tetovo, where I wound up working, and another university called Southeastern European University. And they wound up hosting us. We stayed in the dormitories for a week for orientation. And we had about a week of cultural introductions, language introductions, a lot of fun, as we got to know everyone in our cohort. I believe we went over with a cohort of around 55. And so for that first week, like I said, it was just orientation, some introductory language, and really meeting one-on-one with the Peace Corps North Macedonian staff to kind of get to know where we would be placed. All of us prior to coming to Macedonia knew that we were going to be in one of three sectors. One was community development, which is the sector that I wound up being in. The next sector was in TEPL, or Teachers of English as a Foreign Language. So that's basically teaching English to usually, I'd say, from primary to high school students. And then the other sector we had, which is still very small and still developing, is special needs, which is a quite dire need there in North Macedonia. And so throughout that first week, like I said, we had a bunch of training. They interviewed us. They advised us of the dual language program, which was for volunteers who were interested in studying Macedonian and Albanian simultaneously. And they asked us, on a scale of not interested to very interested, how interested we were. And I put about a 4. I would say, that I would be somewhat, I'd largely interested in doing it. And so at the end of our first week, we were basically told where we were going to train, because after our first week, we would have about 2.5 months of training in a training site. And so I was assigned to a village called Tearta, which is right near Tetovo, where I lived. And all Peace Corps volunteers who went to this training site were dual language. So at that point, I learned I would be studying Macedonian and Albanian simultaneously. So the next 2.5 months were in a very small village in Tearta, which was about a half hour away from Tetovo, where I would eventually wind up serving. Again, at this point, I did not know that would be my site. But we had, our days consisted Monday through Friday, usually, of typical, I'd say 8 to about 2, 3 p.m. in the afternoon of language classes, cultural classes. We would typically do 2 days a week of language class in Macedonian. Then we would switch to Albanian and back and forth. And that was a bit interesting because right as I would kind of get my stride after each 2-day period, then we would switch to the other language. And so for me, it was constantly like going a few steps forward, a few steps back. I lived with a Macedonian host family. So I became very proficient with Macedonian while at the same time studying Albanian. So that went on for about 2.5 months. And then about, I would say, late October, we had our site announcements. And I was announced that I would be in Tetovo at the University of Tetovo in the Office of Project Management. We were sworn in a swearing-in ceremony in December 2018. And the very next day, we reported to our permanent sites with our new host family. to start the following Monday at our work site. My assignment at University of Tetovo was the Office of Project Management, and the main reason that they wanted to volunteer was they needed help with funding. They really were interested in participating in grants and really taking advantage of some of the Erasmus Plus, CEPAS, and Western Balkan funds, some of the other grants that were opened to North Macedonia. So that was their primary reason for wanting to volunteer. But shortly upon arriving there, my sort of work morphed into several other things. My work still was focused on grants, locating grants, trying to write applications, but the university was also interested in outreach. They were really trying to partner with other institutions throughout Europe and even in the United States. And one such endeavor was how I met Stephen, because I'd been in contact with ASU, and ASU has a partnership with the University of Pristina in Kosovo. The region I was in Tetovo, is very, very close in proximity to Kosovo, and a lot of the Albanian community there have a lot of cultural and ethnic ties to the Albanians, the Kosovar Albanians. So through some communications, I was put in contact with Stephen, and we were able to actually go up and meet with him up at University of Pristina to celebrate, I believe it was the 20th anniversary of the partnership between ASU and University of Pristina. So a lot of my work really morphed into those type of outreach opportunities, trying to find ways, any way possible, to engage with academic institutions. Additionally, I was asked by different faculties to lecture on a variety of topics, anywhere from the United States electoral system to psychology of communication. We had several Fulbright scholars, actually several. We had 2 Fulbright scholars at the time in Tetovo who were working in the community, whom I partnered with on various projects. We did some workshops on mental health, which is another underserved need in Macedonia. There's a great stigma against mental health. And so we ran a few workshops on trying to hopefully raise awareness for mental health issues in Macedonia. As Keith mentioned, University of Tetovo, the city of Tetovo is an Albanian majority city, but there is a Macedonian community as well. And the orientation is quite interesting because there's a river flowing through the middle of Tetovo, and for me that was sort of my psychological border, if you will, between the Albanian and Macedonian communities. Even though it wasn't exact, whenever I would cross the bridge towards the actual business center of Tetovo, more the businesses, more the community became Macedonian. So my experience there was that the Macedonians and Albanians enjoyed what I would say is fragile is not the quite word, but a harmony where they coexisted, but they still lived very, very separate lives. And one thing that was quite striking is when I would go into the Macedonian part of Tetovo, I would patronize certain businesses, and I would tell my Albanian colleagues, and they would say, well, I don't know where that is. So even in their own city, the divide was such that the Albanians particularly stayed on their side of town to the extent that they weren't aware of a lot of businesses that were operating in the city center. So even though that there's some semblance of harmony, like culturally, ethnically, there's still a very, very strong divide. That's also prevalent in the language. As you'll see that most Albanians there speak the Macedonian language, but the number of Macedonians who speak Albanian is quite low. So I'd say it's symbolic of the geographical, ethnic, and I would say even linguistic divides that still sort of, I think, inhibit the progress that the country's trying to make. I'm sure a lot of people here are aware, but North Macedonia is working on candidacy to access the European Union. One small victory they had was, which accompanied their name change in the Prespa agreement. They changed their name from, I'd say officially the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia to the Republic of North Macedonia. That was the Prespa agreement, which was reached with Greece to resolve sort of a long-standing dispute over the naming of the countries, and we had a chat about this a few weeks ago by the Melikian Center, really with the nuances and a lot of the history behind that. But in any case, signing the Prespa agreement did facilitate North Macedonia's joining NATO. So that's one step that they've accomplished. The next step is really really accessing to the EU, but there's a lot of, I think, cultural, ethnic, economic, so many issues that are still really holding them back. And in terms of my overall experience, as Keith sort of read my post from LinkedIn, it was a very rewarding experience. It was very challenging because the culture was quite different. The challenge of learning 2 languages, I would say even for me with the Albanian language, the dialect made it very, very difficult because I always felt I was never progressing, because in Tetovo, like most cities, they have a very strong dialect. We studied standard Albanian, which was not common. And I constantly found myself banging my head against the wall. So like, I'm not learning this, I'm not getting it. These people can't understand me, I can't stand them. And I really thought, you know, I'm a failure at this language. But then once I took a quick trip to Tirana in Albania, and I got my validation back because everyone spoke standard and they understood me and I understood them. I'd say the culture of hospitality was one thing that really moved me. And that's one thing that you really can't learn unless you're a Peace Corps volunteer trying to immerse yourself in the community, is that everyone there is constantly looking after you, making sure that you're okay. You'll constantly get calls for coffee, to go out, and the locals are always looking out for you. I would say particularly in the Albanian community as well, again, because of the American role in Kosovo, and the Kosovo wars and Kosovo's independence. They are particularly hospitable to Americans, and in my experience in traveling, it's probably one of the top 4 countries where I actually felt completely welcomed as an American. I would say I made some just incredible lifelong friends, people who I still talk to. The collaboration process I really enjoyed. I'll say one of the biggest challenges I had was the education system there. And working in higher education in particular, trying to make a difference was a bit of a challenge, because even at the university, there's still holdovers from the communist way of teaching, which really is less emphasized on critical thinking and more of a culture of conformity, particularly when it comes to learning. Students, you know, from the time they enter school, even up through university, the sort of goal is to listen to your professor, read the text, memorize everything they've said long enough to really kind of be able to repeat it during an exam. And I would say, from what I witnessed, is questioning a professor, even from an academic perspective, was strongly discouraged. And really the capacity to critically analyze any problem, I think, was a big problem. And that sort of became apparent to me. I'd say my first day on the job, I read a grant application from a professor, and really the lack of, I'd say, quantitative data, of metrics, of any type of goal setting was apparent. And the sort of duplicate, repeat model of education really is inhibiting the academic community. And that's one thing I think that where they really need help. And as I also mentioned in my LinkedIn post, is that I just got a new counterpart who was absolutely fantastic. And she had studied at an American school in Cairo. So she really, her educational development was more in a Western way of studying and matriculating. And we really had some great ideas. And she was very open to, like, almost any idea I had. One of the most rewarding experiences I think I had was we continued to try to engage all of the faculties and try and get them more engaged with the Office of Project Management in developing ideas, in working on grant applications. And what the standard practice at university always seemed to be, whether it was engaging with faculty, I'd say even with engaging outside institutions, was, invite them to come visit us. And I'll say one thing that really helps from my experience in the corporate world was the notion that you don't wait for people to come to you. Like, somehow you have to find a way to engage them. And in speaking with my counterpart, once my new counterpart assumed the role, I said, you know what, let's reach out to these faculty members individually. Let's not have one meeting with all of them. Let's meet with them one-on-one. They probably have complaints. Let's just listen to them. Let's give them an ear. Let's listen to them, and let's see if we can try and solve some of their problems. We took that approach, and of the 13 faculties, 12 agreed to actually meet with us. The feedback, 90% of the feedback was that they were very happy that we actually took the time to engage with them, to actually listen to them, to listen to their problems, and really try and work on solving their problems. One of the biggest problems they had was a shortage of manpower, and we had really tried to encourage them to involve their students. And our thought was that students as stakeholders in higher education should involve in any type of grant, any type of project. And unfortunately, right as the COVID-19 pandemic hit, we were starting to roll out a program where we were going to work on encouraging students to volunteer in the faculties to help their professors. But unfortunately, that was curtailed because of the pandemic. The evacuation happened very, very quickly. I'd say within 2 weeks of it becoming an apparent problem, we were consolidated in the capital city of Skopje, and 4 days later we were gone. And it was one of the most heartbreaking experiences. My counterpart, I'd say she became a really fantastic ally and friend to me. Her whole family were just great friends, and for probably those few months when we started working together, we socialized constantly, and we really had common values, and we had so many plans. And it was so heartbreaking, just for having all the potential things we wanted to do, to have that just evaporate, and to be pulled away, and to only be able to say goodbye to a few people. It was heartbreaking. And there's some of us who we begged Peace Corps, please let us stay, whatever it takes, we will stay. Even if we're the last ones to evacuate, we don't want to go. And unfortunately, and understandably now, I understand why they did what they did, but it was heartbreaking. And I think the last thing that I'll say is that it really was a life-changing experience. I never would have been able to see that part of the world had I not done this. The friendships, everything that I learned, that's just something that the Peace Corps experience, I think, endows upon you that no other experience really can. So I'd say for anybody here who is considering doing it, I highly recommend it. I'm a middle-aged man, and I was able to do it, I'd say sort of mid-career. It's open to anybody. It's a great learning experience, not just about other cultures, other languages, but you kind of learn what you're made of, and you develop the skills to adapt and I'd say thrive even under less than favorable circumstances. So thank you for listening. That's as best as I can summarize my experience.
That's good. Thank you, Eric. And I just wanted to flag I don't know who we have on the call who might be interested in taking up the call that you just flagged, but especially if folks are at ASU and interested in exploring options, Julia Tebben, who is on this call, is ASU's in the Provost's office and responsible for building ties with the Peace Corps. I just wanted to flag her name for anyone who is interested in that. Again, thanks. Yeah, and there she is. Thanks, Julia. Throw it open for questions, including Julia. Please don't feel excluded by that, Julia, but anyone who has questions or comments for what Eric has shared with us, I think we're a small enough group that if you just want to go ahead, unmute yourself and introduce yourself by name and just ask anything you have for Eric.
Hi, I'm Kara, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about what the host family experience was like. Did you live with a host family the whole time, and how did you find that?
Yeah, so I lived with, and my host family situation was a little bit different from most volunteers, because when I was in Tearts during my my training, it was actually like a host mother. So I lived with an older woman. Her sons lived in Skopje. Like, we had one, they would come around probably every, I'd say at least once or twice a week. But for a large part of my time, it was just me and her. And same thing when I got to Tetovo, it was more of a roommate situation, because I had I basically lived with a professor at the university where I studied. And particularly in Albanian communities, Peace Corps usually has a difficult time, at least in North Macedonia, placing male volunteers in Albanian communities because of the culture and really the interaction between men and women. So I can say it was a little bit of a challenge for me, because I had been used to living on my own, and kind of living with other people was a bit of a challenge. My host mother in Tearts, I will say she was a fantastic cook. She was absolutely phenomenal. But it was very interesting because I think like she grew up with sons, and so she very much like, I don't know, she was used to sort of, I think, like beating her sons down or, you know, whatnot, like disciplining them. So that was kind of, that was kind of the approach she took with me, like still very, very caring and whatnot. But again, she definitely, like, she treated me like one of her like lazy sons. I'm not saying her sons were lazy, but that's how she treated me. Once I got to Tetovo, it was very much like a roommate situation. And Peace Corps, a few times, they kind of apologized to me that I didn't get the true host family experience with the host dad, you know, host mother and brothers and sisters or all that, whatnot. For me, just sort of my way of living, I tend to like my privacy. So in both situations, that worked out perfectly for me. My host brother in Tetovo at the university was very well connected, and so he was sort of my primary source for my social connections. Very, very interesting. In Macedonia, gender roles are, you know, there are very specific definitions of what men and women should do. And one thing is that he had a beautiful apartment, like very well stocked kitchen, but like he didn't cook. And so we went out to dinner every night. And I'll say one of the reasons I was very reluctant to cook because he also had a washer and a dryer in his apartment, which is unusual to have a dryer. And he never knew how to use any of those things because he would go to his parents' house on the weekends to have his mother like do his laundry. So I eventually learned how to use the washing machine. And so there were a few times where he asked me, "Oh, can you wash this for me?" You know? And so I was it wasn't too excessive, but then I started to be concerned that, you know, if I started cooking, that then I would be cooking, you know, dinner for him and me as well. And that's not something that I personally was keen to do. But it was a very good experience. But I will say that probably about 11 months in, I decided to move out on my own. And for me, there was like almost too much social interaction because every single night we would go out with the same group of professors. You know, I go out with him for dinner, and then we go for probably 2 or 3 hours, like to go for coffee, night after night after night after night. And that kind of started to take its toll on sort of like my need for privacy. And then also I kind of got the impression that he was either planning on getting married or whatnot. I kind of got that vibe. A few things, nothing serious happened, but at a certain point, I thought for his sake and for my sake, it was time to move out. And that was actually, it was just by luck that there was another Peace Corps volunteer who started a year before me. And she lived in Tetovo. Her apartment was a few blocks from me, and it was far easier than it should have been. But she was leaving right around the time that this was happening. And she said, you know, my landlord is looking for someone else to move in. Why don't you just, you know, move into my apartment? And that was about as easy and seamless as it could have been. So I'd say for probably 4 months until I was evacuated, I was living in my own apartment.
Hey, Eric.
This is
Dan, by the way, Eric was incredibly helpful when I visited Tetovo a little more than a year ago and gave a guest lecture at the university there, and that's where we met. But I wanted to ask you your perception as an American. Do you feel that you were treated differently, received differently by the Macedonian community as compared to the ethnic Albanian community?
I would say, well, yes and no. I would say that the majority of my interactions with the Macedonian community were typically at restaurants or bars. So that, like, everyone was very, very nice, very, very hospitable. The only thing, I would say that there was definitely more of a welcome by the Albanian community. And a lot of my encounters with the Albanian community was almost like, just shy of almost hero worship. Like, there's some people who, "Oh, you're American," almost like in awe of us. And a lot of Albanians just wanted to interact with you just for the sake of interacting with an American. The Macedonians obviously weren't quite as enthusiastic. And then they warned us in Peace Corps that there would be suspicion from us, probably more from the Macedonian community. And I had this one encounter with some Macedonians who they wanted to know why I was there. And even though I told them repeatedly, they they kept saying, no, why are you really here? And like eventually after a while, I just said, well, let's just be clear. Like you think I'm a spy, you know, and we wound up having it wound up being a very, very good conversation. They were convinced that, you know, that I was there on behalf of the U.S. government to destroy Macedonia. Like they were very open about that. But I don't know, it never became belligerent or anything like that. And I don't know, those guys almost became my friends like after a few months. But there was definitely, I'd say, a lot more enthusiasm, I'd say, on the Albanian part for having an American there.
Eric, this is Steve Batalden here. And
hey, nice Steve, how you doing?
Great. I just, first of all, congratulations on what you've done. And I think in terms of the Peace Corps, the position you held was really significant in dealing with project management and development of grant proposals. That's I suspect there are very few Peace Corps volunteers who are functioning in that capacity in higher educational institutions around in various countries. So, and good work. My question relates to that, and that is that, as you know, research in Eastern Europe and Eurasia within universities is oftentimes what we would call cowboy research. That is to say, individual cowboys go and do their own work and the institution receives nothing from it. And for that reason, both at the university in Pristina, and I know what you were trying to do as well, was to institutionalize a research office that would require that research that was institutionally sponsored yield return also to the university.
Yes.
At the University of Pristina, we formed this office for sponsored research that is struggling even now. It still is in its infancy. And I'm wondering whether you feel confident that a comparable office is now in good hands at the university in Tetovo, whether you felt that institutionally you've made a difference.
Sadly, I don't think so. I think the most positive way I could articulate is say that they have a long way to go. I'd say that obviously, as you said, like individuals typically will sort of pursue grants or projects. Sometimes it may go as far as a faculty, but at least what we found is to really accomplish notable research is there does need to be interdisciplinary like cooperation to try and get faculties and whatnot to work together. And I don't think that they're anywhere near that. I would also say that unfortunately the motivation, at least where I was at, for undertaking these endeavors was not the best. A lot of times, there was some type of monetary incentive for these instructors to pursue it, an opportunity to travel or whatnot, and so the motivation, I think, really just to develop research and to have it benefit the university wasn't even there yet. Just the concept of cooperation is almost like non-existent. There's still this competitiveness that really inhibits, I'd say, cooperation. And I would say even what I was trying to accomplish, even towards right up until I was evacuated, was to really try and somehow build a foundation for acceptable standards of research. I worked on one project. We got a Fulbright senior specialist over there for 6 weeks. She was unfortunately evacuated along with the rest of us. But I actually had to fight to get her into the research office because obviously there were administrators within the university faculty who wanted to utilize her elsewhere. And my thought was that really the university's desire to develop research was such a priority that we should have focused on trying to get someone in there. But unfortunately, even the capacity for research was not there. I'd say collecting a proper sample size was not even something they had the capability to do. I would say your proper collection of data. I spoke to a couple of professors at in the research discipline, like the experts, And like their feedback was that even some of the other faculty did not know, for example, which statistical tests were appropriate under which circumstances. So that there's a lot of even the very basic fundamentals of research weren't even there. So it's really got to be, in my opinion, a first things first situation. We've got to get the experts there who will not only train the professors, but I'd say install some form of discipline to ensure that it's being done properly. Because there is work there that is being published as research, as peer reviewed, that is not legitimate, and I know that for a fact that it was not conducted properly. So it's really got to be teaching, I'd say, the fundamentals of research, and then actually instilling the discipline of carrying it out properly, and then instilling, I'd say, the necessity of cooperation, so that faculties will work together and engage other. I'd say one of the biggest opportunities there is to try and get the educational institutions, the Macedonian and the Albanian, educational institutions to work together. Because in terms of their EU aspirations, I think even being able to show that the two separate educational communities can work together would be a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, all very interesting and right on the mark. I share some of your concerns. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would love to ask a question for Eric as well, just because this tends to come up with a lot of the students that we work with who are interested in Peace Corps around issues of safety and security, and sort of what challenges you face in that space, and potentially how Peace Corps potentially helped you prepare for any sort of safety or security issues, and what that was like for you in country. And I'd also like to put that question to any other RPCVs that are on the line. I think Hillary, it was mentioned that you were also an RPCV, so I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, well, I can speak to my experience. It really, I'd say probably the biggest thing with Peace Corps was our director of safety and security, and I will always remember this as long as I live, was vigilance. They really stressed is just vigilance. It's always being aware of your surroundings, and just really building allies within your community as quickly as possible, like people who will direct you, people who will help you navigate any unsafe situations. I can say for the most part, I felt completely safe in Macedonia, but one of the byproducts or one of the things I kind of learned is, especially with what's going on now, is really the concept of privilege. Because as a white man, I had almost no problems. I think the biggest threats to safety that I ever really encountered were probably the traffic and the air pollution. Those were probably the two biggest things. But we had a lot of the volunteers of color, especially the women, had a lot of problems with harassment because of their skin color. And I was actually the safety warden for my region for Tetovo. And even though my role was mainly to help in facilitating evacuation, which I did, and really keeping volunteers in my region apprised of safety concerns, I kind of found myself in sort of like the ally, like mental health role, because a lot of the girls in my region had a lot of problems because of their skin color. But other than that, it was just always they always told us just to be, I think, mindful of our surroundings. The only other issue with safety I'd say that we had was during winter time. During the winter when it snowed, there's very few public services there, and the sidewalks would always turn into icy death traps. So it was always a matter of learning to walk these very slick icy sidewalks that had not maintained for months. But other than that, it was just, it was very much Peace Corps attitude. It's like, we're here. If you're worried, concerned about your safety, call us. But at the end of the day, like be vigilant and don't put yourself in dangerous situations.
Dave, do you want to go ahead?
Oh yeah, thanks, Eric. Really great to hear about your experience. And I'm Dave Fossum, by the way. I'm a assistant professor in musicology in the School of Music at ASU. And I was a volunteer in Turkmenistan, as David said at the beginning of the talk. I'm just curious, how you see, I know it's early stages, but how you see your experience kind of shaping what you're going to do next or with the rest of your career.
Yeah, I've got a pretty good idea, and I'll say one of the best compliments I received while I was over there serving was my counterpart actually gave this to me. I had put her in contact with another colleague of mine in Tetovo, and it's very interesting from a cultural aspect. And then both of them were single women who were under a lot of pressure from their families to get married, and both of them were kind of the attitude, well, I'm not going to be pregnant getting married. I'm going to, I'm going to wait until I find, a man who loves, respects me, and they got pressure. I'd say their family members like pitied them a lot of times, and so a lot of times it wasn't pleasant. But so I thought, you know what, like, I got to get the two of you together. You guys need to meet up and talk about this. And so I put the two of them in contact. They met up, and they really kind of formed a little bit of a friendship and allyship. And my counterpart told me, she says, it's really amazing that here you are, a foreigner, in a foreign environment, but you're able to bring people together. So I know that some way, somehow, that my career going forward needs to be about, I think, identifying people with common challenges, common needs, common strengths and values, and try and put those together. Bring these people together within the framework of trying to accomplish and do well. I've been accepted for next autumn for 2021 to pursue another master's degree in diplomacy and international relations. That's through the School of International Training, and that will be several semesters abroad. I'm hoping that COVID doesn't throw a wrench in that. But I do think that my career, my future plans do lie in relationship building and getting, groups of people together to affect positive change in our world.
Can I ask a question, Eric? This is Steve again here. What have you heard about the future of the Peace Corps program next year? Has there been any clear statement about they've gone through another round of accepting Peace Corps volunteers? What's going to happen to them? What about those who might have had years ahead of them still in the Peace Corps? Will they be returning? Where are we with the Peace Corps right now?
It's country specific. So depending on each country, I think it's gauging its capacity to reopen based on a variety of factors. Like for Macedonia, one criteria that they really are watching closely is how open the borders are. I think in case there's another issue, if volunteers were to return, how easily would they be able to get them out if something else happened. But then there's a lot of economic and other social factors that each country is considering. The Peace Corps did send out a notice, I think about 3 weeks ago, and they had tentative target opening months when they were hoping to reopen. For example, North Macedonia, last time I read, was listed in February of 2021. But again, given the current circumstances right now, I think really those are just goals that they're working towards. But in terms of realistically being able to achieve those, it's in my opinion, it's not looking promising. What they've done, they just closed out what they called expedited readmission. I don't think that's quite the right terminology they use, but in other words, any volunteers who had been evacuated, there was an expedited process for them to reapply so that they could return ideally to their country of service. That deadline just passed. As far as at least in North Macedonia, there was a cohort who started quite tragically, actually. They started their service in December, and I think a week after all of their travel restrictions had been lifted, then the pandemic hit. So we had a group who had really just gotten to their communities, had just started, and they were evacuated. They are appealing, at least North Macedonia, they're appealing very strongly to that group to try and get them to reapply. And as you said, that there's another cohort who've been admitted, they're engaging with them, and basically they're trying to do as much as they can to keep them engaged with the goal of getting them in as soon as it reopens. But again, as far as I'd say almost anywhere in the world, particularly Macedonia, I think that you know, this goal of February 2021, I would say almost the entire year of 2021, it's not looking very good, in my opinion.
Part of the reason I ask is because we are trying to get some Armenian scholars over to ASU on another project. The travel this direction is equally difficult, and it's a question of who has the call on this in part, isn't it?
Yes.
Each country must have its own, host country has its own requirements for admitting someone in, and then the Peace Corps itself must have some kind of guidelines that they're trying to follow. And so it's complicated.
Yeah. And in Macedonia, like what we found even leading up to our evacuation is that a lot of the decisions that were being made with Peace Corps were regional. So like the Peace Corps North Macedonia were in constant contact with Kosovo and Albania, just kind of trying to determine what they were doing. And so it was really kind of for us, it was a regional sort of collaboration determining how they were going to operate and function under these circumstances.
Julia, did you want to add anything to that, or are you?
I'm trying to think, but Eric, I just kind of want, do you just want to come work for us and talk about Peace Corps? Just throw that out there.
I would love to. Like, I love it. I love to advocate for it any way I can.
That's great to hear. So actually, Anna Losky, who's also on the call, is a recruiter, and we were just chatting on the side. We were like, this is great. We need to bring him in for more. I don't have a whole lot else to add. I agree. I think at this point, things are pretty up in the air. Anna might have a little bit more insider information, but I do think at a certain point, once certain countries start to sort of manage COVID in different ways, it'll probably become similar to the safety and security process that Peace Corps goes through with all countries. And a big part of what Peace Corps does, and their primary concern, they always say, is volunteer safety. So I imagine any countries that are struggling more will be less likely to be opened as quickly. It's interesting to say, seeing what we have going on in our own country right now here in the States. But yeah, I mean, we are still actively recruiting qualified applicants, at least at ASU. That's the work that we're doing. It's just we're asking that all applicants remain really flexible and are able to sort of pivot depending on how things change.
So I have a question sort of tied to that, which is, so I did some research a while ago on democracy promotion efforts in Macedonia. And one of the things that strikes me in the domain of US assistance for democracy promotion is that it feels a little bit like what your phrase was, duplicate and repeat. In other words, there's a project which runs for 3 years to develop media literacy, and then that one ends. And then a year later, there's a project to develop media literacy. And so your point about sort of metrics and progress is well taken. I'm just curious whether, in theory, there's nothing. So if the circumstances were right, now that you've made this connection with your counterpart in Tetovo, there's no obstacle to you continuing to play the role that you were playing as a Peace Corps volunteer embedded. Obviously, there are limitations, right? You can't quite do the same face-to-face recruitment and advocacy for pulling the university together, but there are ways in which you could still serve with your relationships, or that the role that you were playing could be taken on by, let's say, an American university in the way that Steve has tried to do for Pristina. Do you think this, I mean, as you go forward, I mean, you're going to continue in this field. What do you think we can advocate to avoid the sense of, like, you go there, you feel like you build relationships, you make progress, and then you physically leave, and as Steve says, there's no a year later, there's very little institutional trace of your being there. And is there some way we can do the work, that maybe universities can play a key role in making things stick of the kind that you were doing? So I'm just curious if you have thoughts on that, especially because you come from a corporate world where you've seen sort of building putting in place things over a longer period?
I think it kind of helps with sort of my answer is that there's got to be some type of financial incentive. Like I really do think that somewhat, and I would say the Fulbright senior specialist we had, her name was Dr. Janet Schofield, and we were really, that's one thing that we were talking about is ultimately to sort of, because ultimately it really does largely weigh on changing mentalities and behaviors, right? And you know, you can, again, the corporate world, we'd always talk about, like, you know, especially when you're managing people, like what motivates you, what are you going to be able to dangle in front of them that's going to get them to change their behavior. And I do think there does have to be some type of financial incentive. I think with all these grants, all these applications, you know, the funds are out there, and you know, and as we've seen any type of project plan with any grant, we have to show sustainability. And that really kind of sums up, I think, the question that you raised is how do we make it sustainable? You know, how do we get it to carry on after, you know, the initiator is gone? And there has to be some time, I think, some type of long-term, I think, financial incentive to really, I think, not just to get, you know, I'd say, you know, the stakeholders there to behave in that way, but to make a permanent change. And so I think we're talking about projects, things that last over a long period of time, with those constant financial incentives, like to get them to constantly behave that way until it becomes habit. And I think, quite frankly, you know, you have to involve the young people. Regardless of the situation, in Tetovo, all over Macedonia, there are some really bright, like, motivated young people who do want to make a difference. And those are the ones you have to engage. And again, I would almost say that I would say for various reasons, sometimes I found reluctance on the part of professors to really try and engage the young people. And I think there needs to be some type of, again, incentive, probably financial again, or some type of prerequisites that involve utilizing young people. Because I think if nothing else, especially some of those professors, you know, the likelihood of getting them to permanently change their behavior, I don't know what the likelihood is. But you get the young people in and you get them engaged, you know, those are the ones who are going to make the change. And so you got to target them, and you have to put, I think, long-term incentives in place to make these changes stick.
If I could just add a word to Keith's question, and maybe add to his question. I'm wondering if it also doesn't require international agency involvement. In other words, the Bologna process really made a difference in higher education by requiring certain kinds of regulations involving European credit transfer system. And there were financial incentives, but it was also a kind of international norm that came to be important. When that similarly will be governing research grant awards, then it seems to me institutions will have an incentive to do the kind of institutionally correct monitoring of research that you were trying to instill. And without that kind of international norm, even if there were to be financing, it could be jiggered in some way. And so I really think the role of the EU is very important in this, and other international accrediting bodies. I don't know, that's my observation. I don't know what you have to say to that.
No, absolutely. I do think that an international presence is desperately needed. The only, and I'm not at all disagreeing with what you're saying. The only thing I'd say, particularly my experience, is that I hear that, at least I heard that all the time, is that we want Americans here. We want Americans here. You know, we need your help. But then it's like once you actually get, you know, once you get like an American institution there, then there's just like this reluctance to sort of, for them to follow through. And so I definitely think that I'd say financial incentives, I would say any type of structural capacity goals, those have to actually be at least initially instituted by the Europeans or the Americans. but again, it's for me, the biggest challenge I saw was getting, I think, these people, especially people who are supposed to be administrators and leaders, to actually embrace what they're being told and to actually implement it. That was the biggest thing, the biggest challenge that I saw.
Well, thank you, Eric. We're coming up on an hour. Unless there's one last question from anyone in our audience. Eileen, are you waving goodbye, or are you going to ask a question?
No, I'd like to ask a question, but I'm muted. I'm muted. Unmute me.
You're unmuted now.
Have you unmuted me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Thank you. Anyway, Eric, your presentation was fabulous. It was very interesting, very well presented. The interesting thing for me is I was with a USAID project in 1998 and 1999. And what's so fascinating is that nothing has changed.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
Yes, I'm sorry. And therefore I wasn't with the Peace Corps. But first of all, your anecdote about the fact that they wanted to know whether I was in the CIA, and they all did it in good fun. And finally, I just said, well, if I'm in the CIA, you're in the KGB, and that's it. And we just all agreed to be spies. But seriously, that was one of the things that was very interesting for the entire population. And the second, and Judge Case, when I was there, I invited a bankruptcy judge, Judge Case, to come and speak on how to be a bankruptcy judge. And one of the things that after he left, they said to me they thought he was also a spy for the CIA. So that's number one. But number two, and more importantly, is the fact that it was while I was on the ground, I made a lot of contacts. I put a lot of people together. We did a lot of changes in bankruptcy trustee organizations and accountants and attorneys organizations and the judiciary. The most interesting aspect of the ability to not want to change was predominantly the bar associations, the attorney associations. They were the ones who were clearly the most reactive, and they liked things the way they were. And you're right, if you could get younger lawyers involved, then that was great. But in order to get younger lawyers involved, you had to get rid of the old ones, and the old ones didn't want to go anywhere. So, and they were like the president of the Bar Association, and they were the officers. So I will tell you, it was hard, and USAID, like the Peace Corps, once the project is over, the project is over. And there was nothing that took over for my project after I left.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know what the answer is. It's not paying money because the lawyers they had their, they worked.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's really, I think, the catch-22. The hope, is always in the young people, like in any society, but particularly in the Balkans with the brain drain, all of them leaving. That's the thing that's truly frightening. Is the people that they really need to stay, the ones who are going to affect positive change, are the ones who, understandably so, are leaving. And that, frankly, I don't know the answer, the solution to that. How do you ask these people to stay?
Well said, Eric.
This is David Brokaw. Is there also, whether it's being a member of the Bar Association or getting promoted within a university, is there fear from someone that wants to take on the role of advancing the methods that American, European, and other institutions are encouraging, that if I do that, that the people above me within my institution are not going to promote me, maybe ostracize me some way, I won't be on a committee, I won't, maybe even socially, because I'm not operating within the accepted system that most of the people or the people in power feel comfortable with, and that it doesn't take energy to change it. It's required for the change.
Yeah, everything there is political, and the degree of nepotism.
Well, change is difficult. I don't know if I'm on, but change, David, is very difficult.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But I think also like that there is really a lot of institutional obstacles. Like I said, the nepotism, political party affiliation is a requisite for almost any type of job. Like you have to be part of a political party, and I'd say within that structure as well, you do have to respect, I'd say, be beholden to the people who hold the position. And it was one professor that I was working with, like she told me, and we had a pretty good rapport, but she was telling me that for as much as the University of Tetovo wanted, foreign institutions there, a lot of professors were nervous because, again, I'd say that the scope of their knowledge, that sort of just read and repeat without the practical application. A lot of professors were nervous that really their lack of understanding of even their own subject would be exposed if, say, for example, European or American professors were to show up. So there was a lot of reluctance, a lot of concern about like each person's individual position, their job, always a concern. So that I think also explains some reluctance to change and resistance.
Thanks, Eric. So we have hit 3. We've got a couple of people already left. Julia and Dave both wrote nice notes to you, Eric, in the goodbyes. For those who are left, maybe a show of hands of applause for Eric for sharing with us.